Morena, everyone. Morena. Right. Well, as I promised, we would be doing. Right. Well, as I promised, we would be doing. Hang on, I've got something in the background. There's two of me. Well, as I promised. There you go. All right. So last week, first of all, I hope you all had a wonderful weekend. It's awesome to be in the Tangaroa phase of the Maramataka, and hopefully we'll be able to get some stuff done and enjoy doing it. I am going to do a reading, and this is the book. So, Psychiatric Drugs are the truth about how they work and how to come off them. It's by a psychiatrist, Diana Kopua. And on Friday, I did about 15 minutes of a reading, which was an introduction to this straight talking series. And so I'm going to carry on. I'm still in the introduction of that straight talking series. But first, the key points from last week were that emotional distress is easily seen as illness. But the problem with seeing emotional distress as illness is that it then is easily assumed that mental health problems, that we don't need to take care of them and that we don't need to think too much about them because we leave them in the hands of experts. And experts in managing mental health problems has been for a long time in the hands of the psi disciplines. So psychology and psychiatry. And psychiatry are doctors specializing in people with mental health problems. Now, the problem with that is that I and many of the Critical Psychiatry Network, including Dr. Diana Kopua, believe that mental health problems shouldn't be shouldered by psychiatrists alone or the specialists in mental health, but in fact by everyone, everyday citizens, and that everyone has a stake in thinking and understanding about mental health problems. So that's what we talked about last week. And then she talked about how knowledge is power, and within the knowledge of psychiatry is a language that keeps it a little bit uncertain for everyday citizens. And this book hopes to be able to unravel that a bit. And then particularly given misinformation and disinformation following COVID, mis and disinformation has been going on for ages. And what I liked about this reading is that it was very fair. It isn't trying to force you to think one particular way, but where it does mention any arguments or opposing whakaaro, they reference those things. They don't expect you to look at the references, but they are there at the back of the book if you do want them. So let's carry on. And I got to a point of evidence. And so let's go there. Evidence. Throughout these books, there will be material that we will present as evidence. This is one of the most contentious terms to be found in this series. One person's evidence is another person's fanciful mythology, and yet another person's oppressive propaganda. Nevertheless, the term crops up increasingly in everyday settings, most relevantly when we hear of evidence-based practice. Hello. I'm reading. That's Mr. Kopua annoying me. All right. The idea behind this term is that the treatments psychologists and psychiatrists offer should be those that work. Crudely put, there should be some evidence that, say, talking about problems or taking a prescribed drug actually helps people feel better. We encounter a real problem, however, when trying to evaluate this evidence. As the books in this series will demonstrate, we will try not to discount any evidence out of hand, but we will critically evaluate it, and we will do this with a bias towards scientific evaluation. The types of evidence that will be covered in these books, along with their positive and negative points, include the following: research methods, numbers, and statistics. On the one hand, the logic of most research is simple, but on the other hand, the way things have to be arranged to avoid bias in the results can lead to a perplexing system of measurements. Even the experts lose the sense of it sometimes. We'll try to explain the logic of studies, but almost certainly leave out the details. You can look these up yourself if you wish. The books in this series look at research into a wide range of issues relating to mental health problems, including the experience of distress, what is known about the causes of problems, and their prevention and treatment. Different research methods are appropriate for each of these areas, so we will be looking at different types of research as we go along. We say this now because many readers may be most familiar with studies into the effective treatments of distress, and we want to emphasize that there are many other credible and valid sources of essential information about distress that are sometimes overlooked. I really want to comment there, but I won't. I'll save it till later. You may have come across the idea that some research methods are better than others, that they constitute a gold standard. In the case of research into the effectiveness of different treatments, the gold standard is usually considered to be randomized controlled trials, and we call those RCTs. In simple terms, RCTs are complex and often very expensive. Experiments into which a group of individuals who all suffer from the same problem are allocated randomly to a treatment, such as a treatment or form of talking therapy or a control treatment. At its simplest, a control treatment is no treatment at all, or a dummy pill or placebo, to test if the treatment works. I'll just go over that a bit more. So imagine you are a group of 20 people or 20,000. 20,000 has more power, and you have the same problem as everyone else, an emotional problem that's described in the same way. And you are either put in the group of a pill, an antidepressant, or a placebo, so a sugar pill, or no treatment at all. And here we go. So we are not necessarily convinced that RCTs are always the best way of proving the effectiveness of different treatments, but they are currently the method given most credence by the bodies that control funding and what it is spent on, such as in England, the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, and that's an acronym called NICE. So we need to understand them. We need to understand them because that's where most of the money goes when we are researching the effectiveness of whether a treatment is useful or not to do with mental health problems. Before it is accepted by academics and clinicians, research must be written up and published in a journal that employs independent people to read it to make sure that it is bona fide and that no glaring mistakes have been made. In recent years, a number of high-profile academics and scientific commentators have drawn attention to possible problems with this system of quality control. This series of books is not the place to deal with these arguments, but where they impinge on the evidence in a particular area, we will make sure it is highlighted. Okay, so remember, I'm going through the areas of evidence, and that was a section on research methods, numbers and statistics. The next is personal experience. Personal experience is an important source of evidence to the extent that nowadays people who have suffered debilitating psychiatric distress are sometimes called experts by experience. Personal stories provide an essential counterbalance to the impersonal numbers and statistics often found in research projects such as RCTs. While not everyone is average, by definition, most people are. Balancing the average results obtained from RCTs with some personal stories helps complete the picture and is now widely accepted to the extent that it has given birth to the new field of survivor research. I'll comment about that too shortly. And the third area of evidence is understanding context. Widening our view to include people's families and lives and the cultural, economic, social and political settings in which we live completes the picture. Mental health problems are connected to the conditions in which we all live, just as much as they are connected to our biology. From the start, we want readers to know that if there is one message or model that these books are trying to get across, it is the problems in mental health. It is that problems in mental health are more often than not the result of complex events in the environments in which we live and our reactions to them. I want to say that again. It is, so if from the start we want readers to know that there is one message or model, if there's one, that these books are trying to get across, it's that problems in mental health are more often than not the result of complex events in the environments in which we live and our reactions to them. These reactions can be also influenced by our biology and the way we learn to think and feel. Hopefully these books will help disentangle the puzzle of distress and provide positive suggestions and hope for us all. Whether we work in the system, currently have mental health problems ourselves, are caring for someone, or are friends with someone who has. We hope that the readers of these books will feel empowered by what they learn and thereby feel more able to get the best out of mental health services. It would be wonderful if our efforts, directly or indirectly, influence the development of services that effectively address the emotional, social and practical needs of people with mental health problems. Now that's that on evidence. That introduction was by Richard Bentel and Pete Sanders in 2020. And my comments, I have a couple of whakaaro that came through for me regarding evidence. And the first one really talks about when we developed Te Ku Watawata in Gisborne, and we had a formal evaluation. So there was evidence in our formal evaluation, and it looked at statistics and numbers. It wasn't a randomized control treatment, but it did have statistics and numbers. And we called on the usual data person who was responsible for the data in the whole of the mental health service in the Tairāwhiti, and that person kept a track of some data, and then other data was taken by an evidence-based evaluation tool from Feedback Informed Treatment, and the platform we used was My Outcomes. Now that data, if you want to have a look, you can go online on Google and look up Te Ku Watawata evaluation. I think Rangahaua Te Ku Watawata. It was the lead from the group that did that evaluation was Professor Dr. David Tipene-Leach, who we acknowledge as a critical friend. And it highlighted not just an increase in self-referrals from Māori into the service, but it also, that tripled actually, but it also increased non-Māori referrals into the service. It reduced significantly the referrals needed for our children and youth who have mental health problems referred by home and school or other areas, other sectors. And it reduced the number. And when I was the head of department for psychiatry at that time, there was over 300 referrals or 300 people being referred into a service. That was the heaviest month. And that reduced significantly. And it went down to something like 80. There were also higher morale within the Te Kuwatawata service, and there was a reduction in the overnight crises over time. What it did highlight, but that we didn't research, and I think we need to do more research on, is the reactions by those people who were used to a different way of working and resisted the change. And so that leads me into the third part of evidence here, which talked about understanding context. And so when we think about our cultural, economic, social, and political settings, we have not been we were not at that time willing to accept that institutional racism was a significant problem, contributing to really bad problems for our whānau. And so now we have the Health and Disability Systems report, we have the Waitangi Tribunal 2575, and we have so much. We have the Mental Health and Addictions report review in 2018, although we have to acknowledge that Whakamanawa, the Māori report, written by Lynn Russell, Michelle Levy, who is the writer for our Te Kurahuna report, and Lisa Cherrington. Now, they were told not to publish their Māori report from the Mental Health and Addiction Review. Now, that just lets us know the political and cultural and social and economic climate at that time. And so Te Kuwatawata ki Te Tai Rāwhiti was developed during a time where people were not informed by knowledge and education about these things that this book is going to talk about. And yet some of the people have been writing since the 80s about some of this. So it's great that I can share some of that. So that was the first thing that I wanted to say, is that although we're looking at developing and expanding on evidence, and I have to say that the integrated primary mental health model with the health improvement practitioners and health coaches, now I'm not talking about the individuals that are in the job, I'm talking about the evidence that that model, which came from Oregon in America, at a time when we already knew we had to transform. The Waitangi Tribunal had already noted racism, so had the systems review in health. We already knew the problems. We already knew about the need to address inequity for Māori. And we went to Oregon for an American model. And when I look at the research that highlights whether it would be useful for Māori, I can tell you that there were some 25 Māori families who were showing promising results. That's not evidence. That's not evidence to roll out the mainstream primary mental health model across New Zealand. That's more about the second section, which was understanding context. Now, in terms of personal experience, I also have something to say there, because we have had, New Zealand led out the importance of consumer voice. And we are familiar with words like tangata whaiora. And it's not that I disagree with that, but I also think when you have one or two people who are leading and representing the lived experience voice, it makes me wonder about two things. Is one, does it represent everyone's voice? Because all of our mental health problems and our experiences are unique to us. And are we at risk of being stuck in a bureaucratic system and fighting as individuals as much as the people with lived experience? And I know them, and I think that they do a wonderful job, but they are sitting there in those spaces, often alone. And I'm really glad that the Māori Health Authority, Te Akaro Ora, has a few representatives from the lived experience voice. But when I actually look around the table for the group that are developing and thinking differently about, thinking about transformation, we all are exactly what I wrote about, or I read about in the first reading last week, which is that we all have a stake in transforming. And so as a psychiatrist, I am family of people with mental health problems. I've also had my own mental health problems. I've been in the system, and now I've been in the system as a practitioner, and now working in workforce, knowing some of the issues regarding practitioners and some power imbalances within the system. So I think that when we're talking about lived experience, particularly with regard to institutional racism, that we're talking about us as Māori. And so we as a collective, as Ngāi Māori, have a stake in all of us, everyone, all citizens have a stake in being able to contribute to transformation. How we go about that is key. And so I'll keep reading. That's my whakaaro. Take care, have a great day.